The Grand Hall of the Dominion War Tribunal was a place built to make lesser beings feel small. Everything was designed for intimidation: the architecture, the lighting, even the air. Massive steel pillars rose like the trunks of ancient titans, their surfaces engraved with the Dominion's victories in sprawling alien script. Banners of war, red and black, each adorned with the crest of a conquered world, hung from the high, shadowed ceiling. The light came from enormous suspended orbs that burned with a pale, artificial glow, casting hard lines across the floor and painting every face in shades of iron. Rows of alien dignitaries sat along the curved tiers of the hall, their seats rising higher the further from the center you went. Each wore ceremonial armor or silk-like robes, the colors shifting faintly in the cold light. They whispered to one another in a dozen languages, the sound carrying like dry leaves rustling in the wind. At the heart of the hall, the obsidian floor was marked with a single crimson circle, the place where those accused by the Dominion stood before judgment. And it was here, inside that circle, that the human was shoved forward. The Dominion guard who escorted him didn't treat him gently. The shove was hard enough to make him stumble, the heavy chain on his wrist rattling loudly as it dragged across the floor. The sound was sharp in the silence, the kind of sound that told everyone in the room this was a man in shackles, a man bound. Except he didn't move like one. He was barefoot, skin pale beneath the bruises and dried blood. His shirt was torn down one side, the fabric stiff with sweat and dirt. A thin cut ran from his jawline to the corner of his mouth, the scab fresh. His hair was dark and matted from days in captivity, yet his posture, upright, steady, seemed entirely wrong for a prisoner who had been dragged across half the galaxy in chains. The guard stopped just outside the circle and stepped back, leaving him alone under the cold light. The crowd leaned forward in their seats, eager for humiliation, for the performance they came here to witness. At the far end of the hall, standing on the dais above the crimson circle, was Captain Varric, 7 feet of Dominion steel and muscle, clad in ceremonial war armor that reflected the pale light in sharp glints. His skin was the color of molten iron, his face framed by bone ridges that gave him a permanent scowl. His tusks curved forward from his jaw, each capped in gold. A veteran of 30 campaigns, he had made his name on the battlefield by crushing human resistance cells in the outer colonies. He enjoyed it. In this hall, his authority was absolute. Varric descended the steps from the dais slowly, deliberately, the floor groaning faintly under the weight of his boots. Each step was a performance meant to draw the eyes of the whole and focus them on the prisoner. When he stopped before the human, the size difference was stark. Varric's shadow covered him entirely. "You are far from your little dote world," Varric said, his voice carrying easily in the silence. It wasn't a shout. Dominion voices didn't need to shout. There was a deep vibration in his tone that traveled through the floor, making the words feel heavier than they were. The human said nothing. His eyes, a pale gray that reflected the light in strange ways, stayed fixed on Varric's face. "Hey," Varric continued, beginning to circle him like a predator sizing up prey. "You are nothing. No army. No weapons. No warships to run to. Just you. And me." Still, no response. The captain stopped, turning to face him again. He tilted his head slightly, studying the human's calm, unblinking expression. Nothing to say. The human's lips twitched, almost, but not quite, a smirk. Varric stepped in close, so close that the breath from his mouth, hot and reeking faintly of raw meat, brushed the human's cheek. "I will make you kneel before this day is done." The human didn't move, didn't blink, and something about that lack of reaction, it irritated Varric more than if the man had spat in his face. The slap came without warning. Varric's massive hand moved faster than the crowd expected, the armor on his wrist catching the light as it cut through the air. His palm connected with the side of the human's face with a sound like a gunshot. Crack! The sound echoed through the hall, bouncing off the metal and stone, amplified by the silence that followed. The human's head snapped sideways from the force, a fine mist of blood spattering the floor. His lips split clean, a thin crimson line running down his chin. But when he straightened again, his eyes were the same, steady, cold, and somehow untouched. The crowd murmured now, a ripple of alien voices. They expected anger, or fear, or at the very least pain. But what they saw instead was nothing. No flare of rage, no flash of desperation, just calm. And then Varric's eyes caught on something. It was barely visible beneath the torn collar of the human's shirt, a dull glint of metal, half hidden against the skin. At first, Varric thought it might be some trinket, some sentimental charm humans clung to. But as he leaned closer, his gaze sharpened. A dog tag, old, worn, the edges dented from years of wear. The chain was blackened from exposure to heat and time. And on the tag, faint but carved deep enough to survive decades, was the engraving. Reaper Unit, 9th Black Ops. Varric's breath caught for just a moment, too short for most to notice, but enough for the nearest dignitaries to glance his way. The murmuring in the crowd began to change. A few voices went quiet entirely. A low hiss of breath escaped from one alien in the front row. The name meant nothing to civilians, but among soldiers, it was a story you didn't tell at night. The Reaper Unit wasn't official. It wasn't in any of the Dominion's records, not the public ones, not even the classified ones most war commanders had access to. But soldiers whispered. They whispered about the raids where whole enemy outposts vanished without a sound, about missions so deep in enemy territory that no one believed a strike team could survive, about the black insignia painted on walls when it was over, a side drawn in a single stroke. And they whispered that if you ever saw one alive, it was already too late. Varric tried to shake it off, tried to remind himself that humans were desperate scavengers. They could have stolen that tag. Maybe it was a trophy from a dead soldier. But when his gaze met the humans again, there was no doubt. The eyes didn't just look at him, they measured him, the way a hunter measured the space between himself and his prey. The captain's jaw clenched, though he kept his expression neutral. His own second-in-command, standing just behind him, shifted uneasily. "Captain," the subordinate began, but Varric cut him off without looking away from prisoner. "Silence." The human hadn't moved a muscle. He simply stood there, the tag glinting faintly, his head tilted ever so slightly as if waiting for something. And for the first time in years, in the cold heart of the Dominion War Tribunal, Captain Varric felt a flicker of something unfamiliar. Not anger, not hatred, something far more dangerous. He felt the first shadow of fear. Under the cold light of the tribunal hall, the silence felt heavier than the steel pillars that held the place together. The alien dignitaries were still, their gazes fixed on the small piece of metal hanging from the human's neck. It was no longer just an unremarkable prisoner standing in the crimson circle. It was something else now, something most of them had only heard about in whispers during late-night war briefings. Varric could hear his own breath in his ears, slow and deliberate, the kind of breathing a warrior forced to keep steady when instinct told him to step back. He had been a soldier for over 2 decades. He had fought on frozen moons where the wind stripped skin from bone, crushed rebellion after rebellion, and faced creatures that tore armored men in half with a single swipe. Fear was not something he knew well. And yet, the sight of that dog tag had planted a small, stubborn seed inside him, a question he didn't want to answer. His second-in-command shifted uneasily, a younger warrior named Kor. Kor's eyes darted between the human and the captain, the subtle tightening of his grip on the hilt of his blade betraying his own unease. "Captain," he said quietly, leaning just close enough for his words to carry no further. "That tag." Varric didn't look at him. "I told you to be silent." Kor swallowed and stepped back, but Varric could feel the younger warrior's unease radiating off him like heat. The human hadn't moved. His arms hung loose now, the chains resting against his legs, his gaze calm but unyielding. He looked like a man who was waiting, as though the entire hall was merely a delay in something inevitable. The flicker of the lights above caught on the dog tag, making the inscription seem almost alive in the dimness. The Reaper Unit. Varric had never seen one in person. He had been told they didn't exist, that they were part of human propaganda to make their enemies fear shadows in the dark. But stories had a way of surviving long after battles ended, and he'd heard enough to know they weren't born from nothing. One story in particular had never left him. It was from the siege of Caliph 4, a mining colony deep in the Orion Belt. Dominion intelligence had reported the colony undefended, easy prey. A strike force of over 300 soldiers was sent to secure it. The official report said the operation failed because of environmental hazards, bad intel, and communication breakdown. But an old veteran in Varric's regiment had told it differently. He'd said there was a man, just one, who appeared on the outskirts of the camp in the middle of the night. The guards thought he was a survivor wandering in. By dawn, every Dominion soldier in the outpost was dead, their bodies arranged in a pattern the veteran refused to describe. The only thing left behind was a crude drawing of a scythe on the wall of the command tent. No one in the Dominion wanted to admit that was possible. No one wanted to believe it. And yet here, in the heart of the tribunal hall, stood a man wearing a tag that said those rumors weren't rumors at all. Varric's mind worked fast. If it was real, if this man was truly Reaper Unit, then this wasn't just another human prisoner to be broken for sport. This was a message, a declaration, and the fact that the Dominion had captured him alive, if they had truly captured him at all, might mean that they hadn't understood what they'd taken. The dignitaries didn't speak, but Varric could feel their discomfort. Even the ones who didn't know the name Reaper Unit could sense that something had shifted in the air. The humiliation they'd been expecting to watch had soured into tension. The human tilted his head ever so slightly, his eyes meeting Varric's again. It was a look without urgency, without plea, just an evaluation. Varric forced his voice to stay steady. "Where did you get that tag?" The human's lips curved in the faintest hint of a smile, one that didn't reach his eyes. "Answer me." "Nothing. You think wearing a dead man's tag will save you." The human blinked slowly, like someone waking from a long, dreamless sleep. "Dead." His voice was low, not loud enough for the entire hall to hear, but it carried to Varric's ears as if the man had spoken directly beside him. "You think I'm dead?" Varric's shoulders tensed before he could stop them. It wasn't the words, it was the way he said them. Not with defiance, not even with mockery, just a quiet certainty, as if the idea itself was absurd. Cole stepped forward again, his hand resting fully on his blade now. "Captain, this could be—" "Enough," Varric snapped, louder this time. His voice echoed off the hall's walls. He took a step closer to the prisoner, looming over him until his tusks were inches from the human's face. "You will kneel before the tribunal, and you will confess to the crimes committed by your kind. Your presence here is not a privilege, it is a sentence." The human's gaze never wavered. "Sentence." "Yes," Varric snarled. "Death. Slow, if I decide you deserve it. Quicker, if you tell me why your kind keeps sending men to die on worlds they cannot win." There was a long pause. The human's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did, a subtle shift, like the faint tremor in the air before a storm breaks. "You think this is my first tribunal?" he asked softly. Varric didn't answer. "I've been in rooms like this before," the human continued. "Big rooms, tall pillars, crowds who think they are safe because they are sitting above the floor." His gaze swept the tiers of watching dignitaries. They always think they're above it all, right until the floor turns red. Murmurs stirred again in the crowd. Varric's jaw tightened. He reached forward suddenly, gripping the chain around the human's wrists and yanking him forward. "You will not speak here unless spoken to." The human allowed himself to be pulled, offering no resistance. His head tilted slightly as Varric's armored hand hovered near his throat. The dog tag shifted into view again, catching the cold light. Varric tried not to look at it, but his eyes betrayed him. The letters seemed sharper now, as if carved into the metal with fresh intent. Reaper Unit, 9th Black Ops. He wanted to tear it from the man's neck, to hold it up in front of everyone and prove it was nothing but a piece of scavenged human scrap. But the thought of touching it, of touching something that belonged to a Reaper, sent a cold ripple down his spine. Instead, he shoved the human back into the center of the crimson circle. The man's feet scraped across the floor, bare skin against polished stone, but he didn't stumble. He stood exactly where Varric put him, hands still bound, shoulders squared. "You will kneel," Varric repeated. The human's voice was almost conversational when he answered. "You should have killed me in the cell." Something in the way he said it made the nearest guards glance at one another. Varric ignored them. He wouldn't give the prisoner the satisfaction of knowing he'd rattled him. "You are nothing," Varric growled again. The human just smiled faintly, and though Varric would never admit it aloud, not to his men, not to the tribunal, not even to himself, that smile was the first crack in his certainty that he was in control. The trial hadn't started yet. The judgment hadn't been read. But somewhere deep inside, Varric already knew that the outcome of this meeting had been decided the moment he'd seen that tag. And it wasn't going to end the way the Dominion thought it would. The air inside the tribunal hall felt different now, charged, electric in a way that prickled at the skin. The alien dignitaries still held their seats, but they no longer leaned forward with the lazy interest of predators watching prey. Now they were watching something they didn't understand, and the unfamiliarity of it kept them still. The human hadn't moved in minutes, yet his presence seemed to stretch, filling more of the room than his body could account for. His eyes were calm, unblinking, and fixed entirely on Varric, as if every alien in the tiers above had ceased to exist. Varric told himself this was still under his control. He was the captain of the Dominion Guard. He commanded this room, this trial, the fate of the creatures standing in the Crimson Circle. And yet, a part of him, small but stubborn, was no longer so certain. He stepped forward again, his boots striking the floor with a deliberate, echoing weight. Each step was meant to remind the prisoner who held the authority here. "You think you intimidate me," Varric said, voice low, the words carrying nonetheless to every corner of the hall. "But I've fought your kind before. You're fragile, breakable. I could snap you in half before you take your next breath." The human didn't answer. His gaze didn't shift, didn't falter. Varric's tusks glinted under the cold light as he bathed them in a humorless smile. "You wear that tag like a threat. You think the name means something here? This is a Dominion. There is no name, no unit, no history that will save you." A faint flicker of amusement crossed the human's face, so small that if Varric hadn't been staring directly at him, he would have missed it. "You're right," the human said softly. The words gave Varric pause. He hadn't expected agreement. "What did you say?" "You're right," the man repeated, still in that calm, measured tone. "Nothing will save me. I'm not here to be saved." There was something wrong about the way he said it, not in the words themselves, but in the weight behind them, as if he'd walked into this hole knowing exactly what was going to happen and had accepted it long before. Varric's voice hardened. "Then you understand what comes next." The human's eyes narrowed slightly, not in fear but in focus. "Yes," he said, "but I don't think you do." The murmurs in the tiers above grew louder. Dignitaries exchanged glances, some leaning in to whisper hurriedly to those beside them. Varric felt the shift, the way their attention was no longer just on the spectacle of him breaking a human, but on the tension between them. That was dangerous. Spectacles work when the crowd believed in the outcome. Doubt made them unpredictable. He needed to put this man on the ground. Show everyone he was still the one dictating the pace of this trial. Varric signaled with a flick of his fingers. 2 guards moved in from either side, stepping into the Crimson Circle. Both carried shock rifles, weapons designed to incapacitate most species with a single discharge. They stopped just behind the human, close enough that he could feel the heat of their armored bulk. "Kneel," Varric ordered. The human didn't move. One of the guards shifted his rifle, pressing the barrel lightly against the prisoner's back. "On your knees," the guard growled. The human's head tilted slightly, his eyes never leaving Varric. "Do you give all your orders twice?" he asked, "or just the ones you're afraid won't be obeyed?" The crowd's reaction was a low hiss, a mix of amusement and unease. Varric's jaw tightened. The guards looked to him for permission to act, and he gave a small nod. The rifle crackled as the guard activated it. A short burst of energy discharged into the human's back, enough to drop most beings in an instant. The human didn't drop. He didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. The guard hesitated, uncertain whether to increase the charge. The human's posture remained unchanged, his eyes still locked on Varric. The faint smell of ozone from the discharge lingered in the air, but the man stood as if it had never happened. "You want me to kneel?" he said finally. "You will have to make me." Varric stepped forward until they were only a foot apart. He could feel the heat radiating from a man, not the feverish heat of illness, but something steady, like the warmth of coiled steel ready to spring. "I could break you here," Varric said, his voice low enough now that only those nearest could hear. The human's answer was immediate. "Then why haven't you?" It was not the tone of a challenge, nor of mockery. It was a simple question, and that made it more dangerous, because Varric didn't have an answer that didn't sound like hesitation. The guards waited for his order. The dignitaries waited for his display of dominance. The moment stretched, thin and sharp. Varric stepped back. Not far, just enough to reclaim the illusion of control. Bind him to the post. He ordered, if he will not kneel, he will stand until the sentence is carried out. The guards moved to obey. Heavy steel clamps were brought from the edge of the hole, their thick locks designed for prisoners who might strain against them. The human did not resist as his arms were pulled behind him and fastened to the tall steel post rising from the floor of the circle. The chains rattled, the sound loud in the silence. Varric turned to the tiers above. "You see," he said, raising his voice. "They claim to be warriors, but in the end, they are still just men. They bleed, they break, and they bow before the Dominion's law." The crowd's reaction was polite, but muted. It wasn't the roar of approval he expected. He turned back to the human, who now stood with his back against the post, the chains holding him in place. The dog tag still hung loose, swaying slightly as he breathed. "You think you've won something by standing here," Varric said, "but all you've done is delay the inevitable." The human met his eyes, calm as ever. "You're right again," he said. "The inevitable is coming." Varric felt an odd chill of the words, though he pushed it down. This was a man about to die. Whatever confidence he wore was meaningless in the face of what was coming. And yet, as Varric stepped back toward the dais, he couldn't shake the sense that it was not the human who was bound in the center of the hole, but the entire room itself, trapped in some unseen snare, waiting for it to spring shut. The dog tag caught the light once more, and Varric's eyes flicked toward it before he could stop himself. The letters seemed to glare back at him. Reaper Unit. He turned away, forcing his attention on the proceedings. But the seed of unease had grown another root, curling tighter in his chest. Whatever happened next, he realized this trial was no longer going according to plan. The clamps held firm around his wrists, the steel biting cold into his skin. The post at his back was unyielding, a deliberate design choice meant to strip prisoners of any comfort before the end. But he didn't strain against it, didn't test the metal. He stood still, breathing evenly, eyes fixed on the dais where Varric now climbed the step to deliver the formal charges. The hole's air felt heavier than before. The crowd of alien dignitaries shifted restlessly in their seats, their voices low, almost hesitant. Even those who had come expecting the thrill of watching a human break beneath Dominion justice could feel something was wrong. The tension wasn't in the shouts or the spectacle. It was in the quiet, in the space between heartbeats. Varric stopped at the top of the dais and turned to face them all. "This man," he began, his voice echoing off the steel and stone, "is a spy and an assassin of the Terran colonies. He stands accused of sabotage, murder, and acts of war against the Dominion. He will be judged here, in front of the tribunal, and his sentence will be an example to all who defy us." His words were met with polite nods from the dignitaries, but their eyes kept flicking back to the prisoner. The dog tag still swung loosely from his neck, catching the light every few moments like a deliberate reminder of something none of them wanted to acknowledge. Varric pressed on, determined to finish the formality before the execution. The Dominion's law is clear. For crimes of this magnitude, there can be no mercy. That was when the human spoke, softly, almost conversationally, but the sound carried in the still air. "Mercy isn't what you need." Varric's tusks bared in irritation. "You think you're in a position to tell me what I need." The man's gray eyes locked on his. "I'm telling you you're running out of time." The exchange drew whispers from the tiers above. Varric ignored them, turning to his guards. "Ready the weapon." A guard at the far side of the hall approached with Dominion execution pike, a long, black haft ending in a spear tip wrapped in faint, crackling energy. The weapon was designed to pierce through almost any armor, delivering a lethal current as it penetrated. It was efficient, silent, and final. The guard approached the circle, his heavy boots ringing against the floor. The human watched him come, eyes unblinking, his posture so relaxed it looked almost careless. The guard stopped a step away, the pike's tip hovering inches from his chest. "You could kneel now," Varric said, "and make this easier." The man didn't answer. The pike surged with power. The guard adjusted his grip, and then the chains fell. It happened in silence, no wrenching of metal, no visible strain. One heartbeat they were locked tight. The next there were nothing but 2 lengths of broken steel clattering against the post. The guard froze. The pike's tip wavered. The human moved. It wasn't fast in the way the untrained saw speed. It was fast in the way a blade seemed to appear already in your ribs before you knew you'd been cut. He stepped in, grabbed the shaft of the pike, and wrenched it sideways with a sharp twist of his wrist. The guard staggered forward, off balance. A sharp elbow caught him in the throat. He was dead before his knees hit the floor. The second guard lunged, but the human was already there, using the pike like a staff to sweep the alien's legs out from under him. Before the body could hit the floor, the man shifted his grip and drove the crackling spear tip through the guard's chest. The sound it made was low and wet, the energy flare briefly illuminating the crimson circle. Gasps broke out from the tiers above. Some of the dignitaries stood, others shrank back. Varric roared and leapt from the dais, war spear in hand. His armor clanged as his boots slammed into the floor, the weight of him shaking the hall. He swung the weapon in a broad arc, the blade humming as it cut the air. The human didn't block. He stepped inside the swing, letting the spear's edge miss him by inches, and drove the butt of the pike into Varric's side. The captain grunted but didn't fall. He was strong, too strong for the blow to drop him, but the human was already moving again, a blur circling around his flank. Varric spun, his spear slashing downward. This time the human caught it, both hands gripping the haft just beneath the blade. The energy discharge hissed along the weapon, but he twisted it away from his body, the strain visible in his forearms. Varric's size gave him leverage, but the man used that momentum, pulling him forward before slamming a knee into his armored thigh. The joint buckled. Varric stumbled. The human's next strike was to the captain's jaw, an upward palm that snapped his head back with a crack of bone. The war spear clattered from Varric's grip. The hall had gone utterly still now, save for the harsh breaths of the fighters and the ringing of discarded weapons. Varric swung a heavy fist, more out of raw anger than technique. The human slipped beneath it, his shoulder brushing the captain's ribs, and hooked a foot behind Varric's heel. The alien's massive form toppled backward, crashing to floor. The human didn't give him time to recover. He stepped forward, planting one boot firmly on the captain's chest, the pike's tip pressed against a gap between Varric's throat and collarbone. The crackle of energy was the only sound. Varric's eyes widened, not with fear, not yet, but with a dawning realization that he had lost. The man leaned down slightly, his voice low but carrying enough for the closest dignitaries to hear. "You should have killed me in the cell." Varric's breath came in short, sharp bursts. The strength in his limbs was still there, but it felt far away, as if it belonged to someone else. "You think this is about me?" the man asked. "It's not. It's about what happens next." The captain didn't answer. Couldn't. The human lifted the pike slightly, then let it drop to the floor beside Varric's head. The clang echoed like a bell. He didn't need the weapon. His boot pressed harder into the captain's chest, pinning him effortlessly. Around them, the guards who hadn't yet moved toward the circle stayed frozen where they stood. No one wanted to be the next to step into that space. The man's eyes scanned the tiers above. Every alien there felt the weight of that look. "The clock started when he touched me," he said quietly, almost to himself. Then, without warning, his boot shifted. Varric gasped, trying to draw in air, but the human crouched, one hand snapping around the captain's throat. It was a grip like iron, not crushing yet, but promising to be if he willed it. "You don't understand what that tag means," the man said. "But you will." Varric tried to speak, but the fingers at his throat tightened just enough to cut him off. The human held his gaze for another long moment, then shoved him back against the floor and stood. He didn't run. He didn't retreat. He simply turned away from the captain, the dog tag swinging free against his chest as he walked toward the hole's massive doors. No one moved to stop him. Varric lay where he had fallen, the sound of his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. The man was leaving, and every instinct screamed at him to rise, to call the guards, to finish this. But he couldn't move, not because of the blow, but because deep down he knew the fight wasn't over. It hadn't even started, and whatever came next, it would not be on Dominion terms. The tribunal hall doors groaned open, their echo rolling down the corridor. The human stepped out without looking back, bare feet silent on obsidian stone. Behind him, dignitaries sat frozen, guards unmoving. Captain Varric sprawled in the execution circle, still trying to process what had happened. The air had shifted. Dominion authority had thinned into something heavier, an awareness that the rules no longer applied. The corridors stretched ahead, lined with statues of ancient warlords. At the far end, reinforced doors opened to the plaza where thousands waited for the verdict. 2 guards spotted him and stepped forward, weapons raised. He didn't slow. One barked a command. The other lunged. The rifle was twisted up, fired into the ceiling, then smashed into its wielder's helmet. The second guard's elbow broke under his grip, blade falling as the alien was shoved aside. Behind him, the tribunal doors slammed open. Varric emerged, dented armor, sidearm in hand. "Stop him," he roared. The human glanced over his shoulder. "You're still breathing." "Not for long." Varric fired. The bolt scorched his shirt. 3 strides closed the gap. The pistol was twisted away. "You're not my target," the man said, striking his neck. Varric dropped to one knee, gasping. The human walked on. Sunlight struck him as he stepped into the plaza. The crowd cheers died into silence. 2 enforcers advanced. One fell with a baton driven into his gut, the other to a helmet-shattering blow. The crowd rippled back. A low hum rose, swelling to a roar. Shadows swept across the plaza. Ships, black-hulled, angular, descending in perfect formation, not invaders, but executioners. From the tribunal tiers came a whisper, "Reaper unit." Panic erupted. Dominion troops scrambled, rifles lifting. The first ship slammed down, ramp opening to black-armored soldiers marked with a single white scythe. Every shot they fired found a target. No soldier fired twice. Varric stumbled into the chaos, firing at them. 2 soldiers flanked him, stripping the weapon away, forcing him to the ground. The human approached. "Now you understand." "This wasn't an escape," Varric rasped. "No," the man said. "It was an arrival." A rifle was tossed to him. He caught it without looking. Around them, banners burned and the plaza filled with the clean, brutal work of the unit. "You'll live," he told Varric. "Someone has to tell them what happens when they touch one of us." He turned and boarded the ship. The ramp sealed. Engines roared. The vessels rose into the sky. Varric pushed himself to his knees, staring upward until the black shapes vanished. In the dust lay a dog tag. He picked it up, still warm. "Reaper Unit, 9th Black Ops." Scratch beneath, "Next time, it's a capital." Varric closed his fist around it, the edges biting into his palm. For the first time, Captain Varric felt like prey.